Hello, my name is Allyson Condra, and today I'm exploring a question that impacts families, policymakers, the future workforce, so everyone. This presentation looks at how different K through 12 pathways connect to post-secondary readiness and long-term success. I will start with the question driving this research and why I chose it, touch on where I found the data, the analysis I conducted, a brief summary, and finally the insights that emerged. You'll hear me use the term post-secondary a lot throughout this presentation. The definition of post-secondary refers to any education after high school, trade school, colleges, universities, any of that. However, for the data in this presentation, the term post-secondary only refers to colleges and universities. So my core question is, does the type of elementary and secondary education impact post-secondary education readiness and success in the United States? I also wanted to understand how factors like family composition, race or ethnicity, and even region shape these outcomes, as well as whether education level plays a measurable role in career and financial stability. This topic is personal to me. We have three kids at home, and especially as they have gotten older, we recognize the importance of prioritizing their dreams and goals, particularly in regards to their adult lives and how their current education may impact that. So, data. My first challenge was to determine whether this data even exists. I quickly learned that it does, but only to an extent. And it isn't all housed in one place, of course. I pulled from several major national data sets, as well as places like the Census Bureau and the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. Because of a lack of continuity across these multiple sources, a lot of my comparisons were only able to include some school types at a time. So let's dig in. Starting with the National Center for Educational Statistics data, comparing high school outcomes by school type. Across the board, private schools show the strongest outcomes in both high school completion and in post-secondary enrollment. Public schools do follow closely for the high school completion. When looking at public schools versus private schools combined there, you can see public schools are at 89%, where private schools are at 98%. So there's a small gap, but I feel like it's a pretty close in the big picture. But when you start to look at the college completion, that's when you really see those numbers start to vary. But school type alone doesn't tell the full story. And when you layer in family structure, race or ethnicity, you start to see clear patterns. Students from two-parent households tend to show higher completion and enrollment rates. Race and ethnicity also reveal long-standing inequities that influence readiness before students ever reach graduation. This slide also shows several zeros, and this is due to small and inconsistent sample sizes when the NCES was gathering data. I think this really shows continued evidence of racial inequities that we have still not addressed in the United States. Here, the regional data is broken out again by single family and two or more parent family homes. Schools in the Northeast and Midwest generally outperform those in the West and South. This ties back to funding models, cost of living, and state level education priorities. With these slides, it's really clear to see how many factors actually impact post-secondary education and interest, readiness, and even success. Now, let's look at the homeschool data. When comparing the 2012 National Household Education Survey with the 2024 U.S. Census report, homeschooling has grown slowly but steadily. In 2024, about 3.6% of students are homeschooled, although this data, unfortunately, does not differentiate hybrid or online virtual public school programs, which a lot of people consider a form of homeschool that's available now. Both Johns Hopkins and the National Home Educational Research Institute point to multi-year growth in homeschooling. Though again, there are some reporting limitations. While Johns Hopkins is a widely accepted research source, it's unclear the level of bias that might exist from the NHERI. And you can see with these numbers here, they do differ a little from what we saw on that last slide as far as enrollment numbers are concerned. The research department of the ACT have found a steady increase of homeschoolers taking the ACT. This is important, I think, because it suggests more homeschool students are considering preparing for post-secondary education, or at least rounding out their high school education. I think it's really interesting, these numbers and that growth that you can see here over almost 20 years. And lastly, I looked at the labor statistics based on educational attainment. The pattern is very clear and expected. It shows that higher degrees correlate with higher earnings and more stable career pathways. This just reinforces the importance of post-secondary readiness regardless of K through 12 background. So to bring this all together, how does post-secondary enrollment and completion differ by school type, public, private, or homeschool? Private schools do have the highest post-secondary enrollment and completion rates, especially when you can see those Catholic private school numbers. Do other factors, family composition, race and ethnicity, region, do any of those things impact post-secondary readiness and enrollment? Yes. It's clear in the numbers that I found that two-parent homes have a higher post-secondary enrollment. There are differences when looking at region, with the Northeast performing the highest, and racial inequities are the greatest cause for concern. And does education level impact career and financial stability? Again, yes. And it's confirmed when we were looking at that labor statistics data. So finally, does the type of elementary and secondary education impact post-secondary education readiness and success in the United States? Yes, it does impact it. Private schools have the highest level of secondary completion, as well as post-secondary education enrollment and completion, particularly those private Catholic schools. But as was clear in the data, school type is not the only factor. So here are my takeaways. When starting this research, my original goal was to evaluate and compare multiple homeschool types, multiple alternative school types like Montessori and Waldorf, multiple private school types, Catholic, non-denominational, secular, and then multiple public school types. I was hoping to include charter schools, magnet schools, to really get a comparison, a detailed comparison. However, there's just not enough data that is reliable, that is non-biased, that is comparable in order to answer my original question of what type of elementary and secondary education best prepares students for success. You can see, some of the standards, even in the data I did find, standard reporting standards weren't met, sample sizes were too small. Again, there was lots of bias, especially when looking at that homeschool and private school data, because they were coming from those institutions. Almost no data at all was found on the newer online and virtual school options that are available for public or private schools. But my biggest insight is that while school type does have an impact, it is only one small part of a huge ecosystem that includes family, dynamics, resources, community, region. All of those factor into readiness and long-term success. I believe changes are needed to level the playing field. They would require strategic investment in public education, including equitable funding across the country, transparency and non-bias in private and homeschool reporting, especially, strengthening career and college counseling at early secondary school ages, which would be like early high school ages, alignment between primary, secondary education and post-secondary expectations, and really just have more conversations between those institutions so that kids at a young age that desire to go to college or have interest in specific fields, that there's clear expectations that are set for what is needed for that to happen. And then, of course, interventions are needed for underserved regions and communities. No single system solves everything. We need multiple pathways that work well. Thank you.